Just before we start, has everyone got a copy of the updated recommendations today? All right. So at 1 o'clock I'll declare our meeting open. Do I have any apologies? It looks like you're all here, so any conflicts of interest for reporting today? Okay, we come to item 3, which is the report, item 3.1, feedback to the Minister of Local Government, New Zealand Department of Internal Affairs on the Three Waters and proposals. So Mr. Harland, if you'd like to speak to his report.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a very important matter which is probably going to only occur in once a generation if we're lucky. Councillors have spent quite a lot of time considering the matter and considering the information that the government has provided. We've also commissioned independent advisors to consider the proposal to create 4 entities to essentially deliver the 3 waters in New Zealand. The proposal is to have councils as owners of those 4 entities, but the normal relationship an owner has to the delivery of the service is not evident through the process the government is recommending, which is to have quite a significant separation between Waimakariri District Council in this case and the new entity and what it would do. I think members from previous briefings are aware of the proposal for governance, which essentially would have 6 appointed people representing local government interests for most of the South Island, 6 from Ngāi. That group in turn would appoint a committee, that in turn would appoint the directors. So that is the governance arrangement that's proposed, which is quite different to the current arrangements that are in place. From the survey that was undertaken by the Council to assist you to understand what your constituents are feeling on the subject, of those who participated, 95% felt that status quo should remain in terms of the ownership side of things and local influence over the sort of order decisions that need to be made ongoing. This Council has, over the years, invested significantly in the Three Waters assets and has been recognised as having good asset activity management systems, made appropriate provision for future expenditure in the Three Waters areas going forward. The information that was provided by this Council to the government's advisors, WICS, which was then subsequently modelled, in the view of your professional advisors, did not fully reflect the reality of the financial position going forward. And notwithstanding that some of that information was corrected, essentially the national modelling approach was still continued with. So for the reasons set out in the paper, it's recommended that the Council doesn't support the current proposal. There's a range of reasons for that, including the loss and lack of influence over local issues that would come to pass with the new entity. We also believe as officials that it would be desirable to try and integrate this reform with the bigger reform. Because you've got the reform of local government, you've got a new framework coming which will be regionally based for spatial planning, and that spatial planning will identify where critical corridors need to be invested in, which includes Three Waters, road and transport, and housing obviously. And it would be appropriate to try and align these reforms and have a package which sets out the purpose of local government, where the waters fit in and how that then aligns to planning. As a growth council, the integration of planning decision making and where growth should be and the provision of services and their timing and their development contribution funding is actually very important. With an entity which is looking after most of the South Island, to have that local Waimakariri voice going forward would be challenging. Mechanisms can be put in place to try and achieve that voice, but it wouldn't be as simple and easy as it is today for this district to align the investment with the needs of the community for additional housing and the various infrastructure There's also question marks as to how reward schemes would be fair under this new system, and there are a number of questions around the stormwater side as to how that would work in practice as well. At the simplest level, the government's proposal is that stormwater assets linked to road would be retained by the council, but all other stormwater assets would be part of the new entity. But it's never quite as simple as that when you look at the nature of water flows and ponding and all those sorts of things. There was also question marks over the potential costs that future residents would pay for water. The government's modelling suggests significantly increased costs over our current modelling. What we do know is that when you're trying to plan for 30 years, that's a very difficult thing to do with any degree of precision and accuracy. So for all of those reasons, Your Worship, my report, which has the support of the executive team, for the reasons set out in the recommendations, we believe that the council should oppose the government's proposal at this stage, that there should be a pause to try and integrate the other reforms, and other alternatives should be investigated, which were looked at in a cursory fashion early on in the process. But once a decision was made to head down this four-entity model, consideration of different ways to achieve reform were essentially not debated at a level that I would have expected that to occur. So I think, Your Worship, that's the way of introduction to my opinion. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions of members? Councillor Dana?
Just in the recommendations that we've received, Mr. Howard, in E, section 8, we're proposing that we consider the well-being of the Waimakariri community. Just wondering, could you elaborate on what that statement actually refers to? Because it does seem a very general statement, and we don't want to fall into the trap of the general advertising like has been shown in Three Waters so far.
Yes, good question. The well-being is include economic, social, cultural, and environmental. With the current planning arrangement and the ability of the council to align Three Waters investment with its planning framework, with the LTP investment, and so on, you're trying to put water assets in place to reinforce the growth of townships. You're also putting them in place to support choice in housing styles and lifestyle and living that goes with that. So if you have those sort of decisions being made by an entity which is trying to look after the whole of the South Island, they're sort of and competing for funding on that basis, then you may not be able to get the best outcomes for your community for, let's say, a business that needs a lot of water. Well, that may not suit the investment company's timetable at the time that you wish to, whereas at the moment that's part of a conversation between yourselves, the developer, and your water department, whereas in the future that would be more difficult to achieve. So it's that kind of thinking that underpins that statement.
Is it possible that statement could be just be made a little bit more specific? Because well-being tends to talk about social well-being, and I just wonder whether we need to clarify how that relates to our submission. I'm just asking for your suggestion.
Well, I think it's a question for the team. I think the submission probably does pick that up, recognising this is the council report, and both it's recommended that the council report and the submission go to the Minister, as well as Department of Internal Affairs and so on. Because if we try and put too many of the reasons here, we end up with a very long recommendation statement, which, to be honest, some of the early versions were much longer than this, but we reduced them.
Sorry, supplementary. Is there a way to still categorise how that impacts? Because an argument could be made that the well-being of the community is affected by poor water. So the well-being in here, we're talking about our inability to grow in zone appropriately for our community, or is that really what you're trying to refer to?
It certainly is part of it. It's the alignment of growth, economic development and so on, and using water and infrastructure provision and its timing with other assets. That's the key point here.
So we could put with relation to those elements?
Yes, I think we could add that in.
So what was the suggestion then? Just proposal would be detrimental to wellbeing of the Waimakariri community with
Relation to?
With particular regard to the integration of the provision of three waters infrastructure with growth needs and economic development opportunities.
Thank you.
Is there any objection to that being considered? So I'd really like us to have a consensus motion today rather than one going to government with a whole series of amendments. It would look better as a consensus motion. So Jim, what does it mean to a particular regard?
Sorry, you'll have to read it again. I didn't get it.
Did you get it?
No. Particular regard to the provision of three waters.
Three waters infrastructure and growth as an enabler of economic development.
Growth in, sorry,
Growth is an enabler of
as an enabler. Sorry.
Sorry, the round make it better.
So sort of wording would be with particular regard to the end of age, with particular regard to provision of three waters, infrastructure and growth as an enabler of economic development.
Got it.
Everyone clear on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Further questions? Right, we're going to come to Councillor Wood. You have a question?
Yes, would it be possible also to make sure that we send all this to the Prime Minister?
It will be.
Thank you.
I'll cover that shortly. Okay. All right, so we come to the recommendation. 3.1, I'm going to move it today. Seconded, Councillor Atkinson. You'll reserve your right to speak. Just want to say, firstly, in all my years of public office, many of you have been in the same situation too. I've never been approached or stopped as much as I have been around the topic of three waters. Many phone calls, and even with controversial topics such as the stadium, I've never been approached as much as I have about this matter. I support the recommendations. I want to say how proud I am of our staff for the work that they've done. Jared, Libby, Colin, Kelly and team, Alistair and our comms team, Jeff Millwood as our finance manager and Jim as our chief executive. You have all worked hard and provided absolutely superb advice and guidance on this, and Jim in particular, I appreciate all the advice and guidance that you've given me. We've had a number of phone calls and Zoom calls and meetings across Canterbury and across New Zealand on this particular matter. Today's report and submission is evidence of all that hard work that's gone in. I'm proud of you all as councillors and as colleagues. It hasn't been an easy matter, but as a team we've supported each other, and I really appreciate how we've worked together on this particular matter. And it hasn't really been easy at times to lead this matter. I felt at times that we've been out on our own as a council, or part of a very small minority on this particular issue. We can be very proud that our work and other councils is starting to turn the sentiment around of a number of councils in this country. And I see Christchurch was unanimous in its opposition yesterday. President of Local Government New Zealand said on a call recently that in his opinion he felt less than 10 councils would opt in. We're going to see over this next period of time whether that's correct. What I'm picking up is it's a very small minority that are going to support this, but we'll see whether that rings true in the coming period of time. I think we were absolutely right to go out and ask our community. After all, they paid for the Three Waters assets, and it's only by being informed, and it was important that we are informed by our community before we reach such an important decision. As Jim said, it's probably one of the most important decisions as a council we will make over this term, if not within this whole, since this council was established back in '89. As we know, the community came back to us after 3,844 surveys returned, the highest number of surveys that we've ever received for response to a consultation item. The nearest item would have been at the time of the 2018 long-term plan and the 800 submissions we received, which were largely to do with the stadium at the time. So just to provide context, as we all know, that's a very high return rate. Can I acknowledge all the governance staff and all the others that have helped input all that material for us, so we've got that in front of us to consider. And as we know, through that, 95% of those who responded advised us to opt out. The overwhelming reasons were that residents weren't happy about losing local control and the local say over their assets and infrastructure. That was the overriding reason. They're also concerned that we may end up subsidising other communities throughout this country. Today as a council we will give our support to the voice of our community. To inform our position over this time, we haven't just sat back. We sent 28 questions to the Minister, and on a call I was on yesterday with the Minister and DIA, apparently, Jim, there was 14,000 questions that have come from councils throughout the country. We've convened special meetings with the Department of Internal Affairs. We've engaged independent consultant advice from Ward. Our expert and professional staff have analysed all the material. Other experts, Castalia, Morrison Lowe, and even the former Chief Executive of Christchurch City Council, Mike Richardson, have put together material. And they've all reached the same conclusion, that the four-entity, one-size-fits-all model is not right for our community and ultimately for our country. The Scottish Wicks model might be okay for Scotland, but it's not okay for here. 30 other models, as Jim mentioned, were not adequately considered. Instead, the government landed on this one model. I'm very proud, and we can all be very proud of what we've achieved here over the last 20 years, and in fact longer than that. But over that period of time, we've invested over $100 million. And these haven't been easy conversations to have with our community over upgrading water supplies. I remember the Summerhill, the Oxford, the Cust, the West Ayrton, Points Road, Garrymere, Paul, you and I remember that very well. They weren't easy conversations to have, but absolutely necessary to make sure that we were upgrading our water, to make sure that our communities have safe and reliable drinking water sources. We invested as a council on the ocean outfall some years ago too. One of the largest projects this council's ever embarked on, at $36 million. A huge piece of work, and showed real vision and foresight as a council of making an investment. We've got a 30-year infrastructure strategy. We know the condition of our assets, and we know where the investment's required, and it sits within our long-term plan. It sits there knowing what we've got to fund over this period of time. I want to remind the Department of Internal Affairs and the Minister, as I did yesterday, of the good faith in which we entered this process, and that we trust that similar good faith will be shown regarding the Council's ability and their own decisions to opt out if they choose to do so. Extremely disappointed with the government's advertising campaign. Grossly misleads with sludge coming out of taps and in waterways. It's not an accurate reflection of where we are at as a nation. It's not acting in the partnership in which the Minister set this discussion up in the first place, and quite frankly it's been offensive to our sector to have to endure such advertising. The Minister finally acknowledged this yesterday, that the advertising wasn't ideal, but she said it has raised awareness and probably put Three Waters there where it wasn't before. Hardly an act of good faith, in my personal opinion. With this in mind, I have very real concerns about the Department of Internal Affairs leading the exercise of the future for local government. I hope they don't go down a similar path with the advertising model that they've done to date. Personally, I think this should be led by our sector and not by the Department of Internal Affairs. On Three Waters, I think LGNZ, our lobbyists, are not adequately representing our sector. And following today's meeting, I'm going to write to the President asking that he calls a special meeting to seek members' views on Three Waters. Members, that's our council's views. At the present time, they've signed, as we know, a heads of agreement without our say, and this is being used by the Minister quite often in conversations as points where your sector is working alongside us, we have a heads of agreement. Never sought our opinion on that before it was signed, and I'm pretty confident other councils will back this call. As is in the motion, we urge the government to press the pause button. In fact, go fast rewind back to the start and start this process again and work with councils to look at alternatives. Embed the new water regulator first. It's got far-reaching powers, the water regulator, and can require councils that aren't performing to make that investment and then build them later. It's huge powers. And look at other alternatives like the old drinking water subsidy scheme or the NZTA co-funding partnership model. There are lots of alternatives, and I'm sure all councils that I speak to, and I'm sure you've been in touch with, would welcome that opportunity to look at alternatives. In our letter that we're going to send following this meeting today, we are inviting the Minister to meet with us. I really hope she takes up this opportunity, as I know, I'm sure we would all welcome that conversation. The model we have and how we operate at the present time is not broken. I'm not going to say that there are other councils in the country that do need to look at further investment, but a one-size-fits-all, as is proposed here, is not the right answer. We need to go back and have a real look at what is proposed and look at the other alternatives before landing on one. I urge the council today to support the recommendations here. They've been well canvassed by us all, and I hope we can show that we're in a unanimous position today. Thank you. Further speakers. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for those comments. I'd like to echo some of them, and also to thank you for incorporating colleagues' suggestions in the recommendation. Water is pretty critical. None of us can survive without it. It's said to be the new gold of the 21st century, so it is something of high value. It's a very serious topic, and I suspect that's the reason why the community, with a pretty boring topic of infrastructure and water, have got in behind it, and I'm just astounded everywhere I go. People seem to know about it. And my experience is similar to yours, that people are very well informed and certainly not in favour of opting in. I think there are two main issues here with this proposed model. The first is financial, and I'll say shortly that I think it's a flawed financial model. Secondly, the question of governance, and again, it's somewhat bloated and undemocratic. I'm sure all of us will accept the need for good water and environmental outcomes, but is this proposal the way to achieve that? Financial, well, it really got off to a bad start with fanciful financial data given to us that even I, as a former lawyer and not accountant, could see didn't really add up. So they got off on the wrong foot, And as people say, if it's too good to be true, it is. So the outcomes were not likely. The Memorandum of Understanding we signed last year, we got 8 million for signing it, was really a crude attempt to get us on board with the proposals. And I probably don't need to remind you, but I voted against that at the time, and I'm pleased I did. I think the MOU has turned out to be somewhat of a Trojan horse. It's evolved over time, and I think it's being used, the data that we provided is being used against us. The outcomes for ratepayers are implausible, and her own staff and the external consultants have confirmed that. And the custodial report, which the Waimakariri District Council obtained, applies to us, I think, in the same way it applied to them. For ratepayers, I see higher costs as we cross-subsidise others who have not looked after their assets. We have a very good record of investing wisely and having a long-term plan. We manage our assets appropriately and prudently. Not all have done so. The Scottish model overestimated savings and suggested unrealistic benefits of scale. How on earth you can predict financial data 30 years in advance is beyond me, but obviously someone has a crystal ball. Entity D, which we would, if this proceeds, form part of, is based on a tribal takiwa. It's unrelated to physical catchments, territorial authority boundaries, and in my view, how can that possibly achieve efficiencies that are given as a reason for the reform, something in the order of 45% over 30 years? These are diverse areas. What do we have in common with Invercargill and their water supply? Nothing, I would suggest. The boundaries are illogical. The master plan seems to be to use our good assets to subsidise the deficiencies of others. The assets will be borrowed on, billions of dollars, and spent throughout Entity D. I particularly took offence at the sudden definition of ownership, which was referred to as bespoke. It needs no legal definition I've even come across of ownership, and seemed to be a way of trying to sell the concept to the community that you still own it when you don't. It's a Clayton's form of ownership. Our assets are over $600 million, and we're going to get $22 million for them. It's 1/3 of our business, 1/3 of our staff. How can that be a good deal for our ratepayers? The second matter of governance, there is a loss of democratic control. It's bloated. There's 3 layers to get to the corporate board who will actually administer the entity. We will have minimal, if any, input in that. The Memorandum of Understanding said that both parties would act in good faith, and quote, the council will have the right to choose whether or not they wish to continue to participate in the reform program beyond the term of the MOU. That position appears to be changing from comments we received from the Minister. Last year I signalled by entering the MOU for $8 million it might be difficult to exit the reform programs, and I said tongue in cheek, and some of you might remember this, how often does the mouse give the cheese back? Not very often, I suggest. It was supposed to be a voluntary position, and I say let's hold the government to that mandate and shouldn't even be considered given the background of this proposal. And if the government does go down that path, I think it should be strongly opposed, and that's in the recommendations. There are other risks of the program, the risk of privatisation in future and so on. One of the good things we've done is engage with our community, and the survey that we received gave us an overwhelming mandate of what the community thinks. The last thing, and I've probably waffled on too long, the role of local government New Zealand is a concern. The recent heads of agreement signed by local government New New Zealand states, LGNZ commits to supporting, endorsing and promoting Three Waters program and not oppose mandating, but publicly can express its disappointment. End of quote. I think that's disgraceful, really. LGNZ is supposed to represent us at a national level, not promote the government's policies to its members. And finally, in conclusion, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, 3 weeks ago said, providers know their communities best. She was referring to the vaccination program, but she's right, and I believe the same applies to Three Waters. I would invite the government to listen and consider the alternatives. It needs to provide solutions to where problems actually exist. And I would echo your comment, Mr Mayor, that one size does not fit all. Finally, we need to keep local government local, and I think that's the main point we need to emphasise. So I fully support, and I vote twice with these recommendations if you accept 2 votes from me, but I'm very much in favour of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redmond. Before I come to Councillor Doody, just if, for the benefit of Councillor Ward, if you look at L says in there that requests myself on your behalf to send our submission, resolution and our report to all members of Parliament. So that includes the Prime Minister in there. And it's ready to go once we've made a decision today.
It's nice to know.
Councillor Doody, so I have Councillor Doody, Councillor Ward, Barnett, and then Dessert, Councillor Atkins.
Thank you. Mine's just going to be very brief, and I'm very pleased to see that it was unanimous that we've voted for this to go to government. I listened yesterday to the webinar by Melbourne on the Three Waters here, and I asked the question, or I sent a question, how does the differential between residential and rural water work, bearing in mind that only very small margins for house water drinking? And the reply came back, no problem, irrigation feeds the stock water. They have absolutely no idea how the rural sector work. And does our government really know how the rural sector work? I just found it absolutely, frankly, insulting to the quality of work that our staff have done for all the work that they've put into our areas, including the rural sector. And I'm just really, and it's quality for all, and I really just can't understand where this government is at, because quite frankly, it is insulting to the whole of the regions. Thank you.
Councillor Doody, Councillor Barnett. Oh, sorry, Councillor Ward first.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a major issue with the control of our ratepayers' assets going into an entity which is undemocratic and shows this Labour government is following their promises made during their extensive to-date consultation with iwi. Now this government is trying to deliver on these promises made. There is no certainty that our council will have any representation of the 6 people on the board and thereby lose total control of our district's future. Our council has acted responsibly. This is not working. Thank you. Our council has acted responsibly and has sound financial update models for the next 30 to 50 years to adequately give great service and meet the water standards and infrastructure required. I strongly advocate that we stay firm on the status quo, but support a government assistance to needy and unfunded councils to bring their water infrastructure up to date. And I really want to reiterate that we stand firm, and because I really am concerned that there is a motive there by this government, and their one motive is joint governance, and that is not democratic.
Councillor Ward, Councillor Barnett.
Yes, when I first heard about Three Waters reform, I thought, great. If this this reform is going to deliver more swimmable rivers and lakes, if this reform is going to deliver safe, clear, unchlorinated drinking water, great, that would be brilliant. And in fact, when I asked my teenage daughters about the advertising, they were going, it's going to clean up all our rivers. And that was the feeling they got from the advertising campaign. Of course, it's not. And I think what really concerned me is that they never put out a clear consultation. I just cannot believe it for an issue this important, a clear consultation for the whole of New Zealand explaining what it actually meant. All the way through, the government confused Three Waters infrastructure with freshwater and rivers and environmental protection. And of course we all want our environment to be better, but it's not going to be achieved through these reforms. Our council believes in continuous improvement, and we've done a lot of it, particularly since the earthquakes. I don't know how many times the cameras have gone down the drains to try and make sure that the infrastructure is working. We have a really good idea of what our infrastructure is. The feedback we've received, it's really democracy in action. We're hearing from our people. The New Zealand people are speaking up and saying, well, actually, we're not quite sure this is going to work. And in many ways, we see it as being a bad thing for our district and a bad thing for many parts of New Zealand. The recent disaster events and floods and issues we've had in our district actually emphasise that. We have really fast local response that gets out and fixes flooding, drainage issues, fixes sewer problems. Will we have that under an entity that services the whole South Island? I think not. I can't see efficiencies by just adding an extra layer of bureaucracy. And so the figures just don't add up. It just won't work. What I would really like this government to do is please focus on the councils who need some help with drinking water. I'm not into the blame game. I know that some councils have realistic, actual reasons why they couldn't afford to bring their infrastructure up to modern standards. Help them. Give them some opportunity so that the ratepayers don't have to fund impossible bills. But we're not that council. Fix the broken sewer systems around the country to make sure that sewage is not going into the waterways. But we are not that council. Let the new water standard regulator have time to settle in and do a proper review and focus on the highest risk. When you do a budget, you cannot fix everything, but you start with what needs fixing first. So my message to the government is please listen to the people. Listen to the voices out there that have told you we don't understand the benefits. We can't see anything that's going to help. We cannot see the efficiencies that we're losing in the figures that we've received. And just take a pause, take some time to discuss these issues with the community, with elected officials, and with the experts, our staff, who see what actually happens on the ground. So I will definitely be voting to pause, to opt out today.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, do you wish to use one? No. Councillor Stewart, any councillor?
Thank you. I certainly agree with much of the sentiment that Councillor Barnett has put forward, particularly in the confusion that's out there. I mean, I accept, as I think is general here, that there is certainly a need for a change in the way that our water services are delivered. And I welcome the conversation and action to deliver that. And I certainly listened very hard to the Minister about what was going to be the outcome of these reforms. And I got a distinct impression that we were going to get delivered the freshwater NPS. And I heard it again, she said the same thing. But in fact, that's not the case at all. And trading on this confusion out there that this is an exercise for the transfer of part of the infrastructure that some councils have and some councils don't have in very good condition. But, and I can't reconcile the fact that the figures that were asked of this council and all the councils around New Zealand, and the dashboard that ends up where our financial people and consultants that we've asked to assist here can't easily marry, in fact can't marry the figures that the government has put before us through this model. And, you know, it's, as others have said, it wouldn't appear to be one size fits all. I don't have any particular difficulty with a joint governance model with our treaty partners, because that in fact is what has been put forward. That's okay. But I think the confusion out generally that this is going to deliver what it is not going to deliver is the thing that has stopped me from supporting it. I would like to see other alternatives. I would really like to see delivery of the freshwater outcomes that are, I thought, and I still have an understanding that that's what the Minister is talking about, but it isn't the case here, and the confusion is right. We do have issues to deal with here. We have relatively young infrastructure in potable water delivery, but in fact we only supply 76% of the district here. 24% are on private wells. Just where they will be in the reformed, council, who knows? And as others have said, one of the most valuable groups I sit on is our local rural drainage group, because in fact they are people who understand what is happening in their patch, and I think we're all better for those groups and staff as well. I mean, to where that type of group fit into this this model, I've got no idea. And I'm not a fan of CCOs, and whether this is a CCO with a new sort of frock on, that's fine. But I think the lack of local input again makes me very nervous of this whole proposal. As I said, I am open for change. I am open for, within this council, having a far better and comprehensive rating system across the district for water supply, sewage treatment and land drainage and stormwater management. I'm forced to conclude that this is not going to do it. So I would welcome a further conversation, more options, but I'm forced here to say that this is not, this option here is not going to deliver it for me. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, Councillor Williams.
Very hard to say much when we're getting near the end of everybody talking, but I wholeheartedly support basically what's been said by everybody, particularly the Mayor and what have you. But one of the other things that we've got some of the best local staff in the whole of New Zealand. We've got one of our best water systems in the whole of New Zealand. We comply with our consents. As a councillor, it's actually really good that I can walk up the main street of Rangiora or Kaiapoi and people don't come and criticise us because we haven't got a good water supply. In fact, it's the opposite. They come there and say, we've got the best drinking water in New Zealand, and I'm proud of that. And so I think we've got to think of the staff as well. I know they could get transferred or what have you into a new group under this proposal, but I don't want that. I want to keep what we've got because it's really, really good. We just had a bit of a flood around the area. Our staff cross over and help other departments in our council. Without them, we could be on a back foot. And I think it's very, very important for that side of things. The government has not been upfront and delivered proper clarity on the system. In fact, they've been misleading on what they've been stating in their figures and what have you. I've asked questions of the government on different matters on figures and all that drama. They couldn't answer them properly and truthfully. That's not good. The advertising, they've put $3.5 million into misleading advertising. That's not good. I don't think there's anywhere in water in New Zealand that gets sludge coming out of the taps, and that's the way they're portraying all councils in New Zealand. The feedback I get from all the people is they want local control, and that's a very important thing. Our staff are local people. They know if there's a problem, where the problem is, how to fix it. We've got our local contractors that are working for us. They know the systems inside out. If they come from a different area a long way away, we're going to lose that local knowledge, and that's very, very important to have. Is it democratic what the government's trying to do? No, far from it. I've watched the question and answers on Parliament in the building, and our minister stating that most of the councils are for this. I've been to lots and lots of meetings around, and most of the councils are against it. So she's misleading Parliament in those situations, in my thoughts, which is not a good thing for a democratic government to. Well, they're meant to be democratic, but in this stage I don't think they are. The government is heading for a revolt if they try to force this through, because I can see the big numbers of our people here just don't want it to happen. And revolt's a nasty word to be putting at the council table, but that could be going to happen if they try to undemocratically put this through. And originally we come to the arrangement with them, it was going to be an all voluntary opt-in or opt-out scenario. It's changing, they're changing the playing field as we go. I'm not quite happy with a 50-50 deal with iwi leading with us in the governance on it. I think iwi are quite entitled to have in the regulation side with the water. But the actual governance on it, I don't think that quite fits with a 50-50 scenario. Local government, New Zealand's meant to represent councils in New Zealand. I don't think they're doing their justice properly, because they've been naughty in putting out statements that do not recognise the majority of what councils think. And I think it's important for local government to look at themselves and say, crikey, something's going wrong in our administration here. We're not giving the facts of what the local councils want. So I will be supporting this recommendation 100%. In fact, I probably personally think we're not strong enough on this recommendation, and I think, it probably should be stronger there, but I'll 100% support it. And like Councillor Redmond there, if I had 2 votes, I'd vote for it twice as well. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Williams is right, it's getting difficult to bring in new material, but I just want to go back to that dreaded earthquake time. The government said at the time, you need to run your own business, you need to make sure that you do your own recovery plans. You know your community far better locally than anyone else does. And that was a different coloured government at that time. And all the red government did was put pressure on the blue government to make sure that the local voice was heard. Interestingly, we get a Three Waters reform in which they don't want to hear from the local people. People who want to hear from the local people are the local government people. That should have been government driven. It is not. In fact, they advised us not to consult with our people when our mandate in everything we do is to consult with our people. I'm not sure whether we have a communist government or a normal government. They can make their choice on whether they decide whether we should consult or not. That is just not good enough. I've been in local government now for just on 20 years. Never have I had people talk to me on an issue such as this they have on this. I get to walk down the street takes me twice as long. And boy, it used to take me a wee while before, so you can imagine I don't get much done during the day wandering up and down the street with people tapping me on the shoulder on the Three Waters issues. And the government actually make really good examples. I give you Fletcher's. I'm not sure how many times we've bailed out Fletcher's as a country for billions and billions of dollars. The electricity reforms, gee, they've worked well. They're brilliant, aren't they? Cheaper electricity for everybody. Everybody gets their dividends back in the country. What a load of rubbish. No more efficiencies in the electricity business than there has ever been before when it was run privately. The best people to run these businesses are the local people. I have never yet seen in all my time, and we have done a consultation on an annual plan every year in this council. I have never yet seen where we haven't had submissions of people holding us to account for what it is that we do. Governments have pushed down different regulations to councils for many years. They have never funded them, and then when you can't fix a water pipe because you are funding something else that has been pushed down, you are irresponsible. Well, government, it's about time you started taking responsibility for yourselves. We have systems in New Zealand that work for New Zealand. Wakakatahi is one. Now, that is just an example that could be tweaked, moved around, or done something to fund those who need it. We have had exceptional staff and consultants go through what it is that has been put in front of us. $282 million we're going to invest in the next 30 years. If we are wrong by twice, that is $750 odd million. And the government says that we need to throw $1 billion in there for Waimakariri. Why? Because that's a good number. It's just $1 billion. It's a nice round number. We'll throw it in there. They can afford to pay it. Don't worry about it. They haven't got a bad deprivation value. Well, government, we're not here as your whipping boy anymore. We've had enough of being the whipping boy. It is time you took responsibility for yourselves and you started looking and consulting with people instead of the dictation that is coming out of this government. We need to make sure that we force that and that it happens. I agree with Councillor Williams that we could be more forceful, but I'm not sure how could we be more forceful than saying we're going to opt out, because I'm not sure what the other option is, apart from packing our suitcase and our lunch and going home. If we're going to opt out, we're going to opt out. It's as strong as you can get. So, look, I absolutely support this in front of us. We've spent 2 years talking about this. To be quite honest, I don't believe we have the information. The information that we've got is incorrect. We've had staff that have, poor old Jared over there is losing his ear, and I'm sure that he's had enough water that he doesn't want to see anymore for the rest of his life. But exceptional advice. So, thank you to all of our staff. But we need to really send this message to the government and make sure that they are listening, because up until now they have not been.
Do you wish to speak, Councillor Jennings? Sorry, were you indicating it? Because if you went, it's fine. I just saw you.
I was going to say something, but I thought my moment had passed.
No, it's only when the right reply is being put. I haven't done that yet, so you're welcome to speak if you wish.
Right. Well, in addition to all of the previous comments, which I agree heartily with, I'll just add one or two to the mix. The government analysis for this has been rushed. It's used broad, high-level, top-down figures, and they're incorrect. They say that we need to spend $1 billion of infrastructure in the district. On our books, we've got $282 million. That's a big discrepancy. So either they really, really didn't analyze things, or else it's a case of donors versus donees. And they think that we have maybe a spare $718 million in our back pocket that we can dole out to subsidize others. DIA really has no idea, as it said itself. They haven't actually analyzed our actual situation. And that's evident in their assumption of us having a 360% debt to revenue reproduction versus our actual largest projections at its peak of 150%. If that were not the case, we would not have the AA Standard & Poor rating that we've got. Our knowledge and assets and the management thereof have been highlighted as a benchmark, yet the government seems to have no knowledge of this when it suits the agenda. If there is to be reform, it mustn't be rushed just to get it over the line in time for the general election. They have rushed this process. They haven't looked at the details. They've used very broad, high-level assumptions. They've even come out and been honest with us and said, well, actually, we didn't look at your figures. And whenever you look at the dashboard that they publish for WDC with its glaring imperfections, incorrect numbers all across it, it's obvious. So how can we trust that this reform, if it goes through in the form that it's being presented to us here, would actually deliver us anything but another failed Kiwi build or something to that effect? There are some amazing facts and figures in this report, and I commend everyone who had a part in putting it together. And those are for them to read later, and I will leave it at that. But I absolutely support this council's position and giving a very strong message to the government that we do not support the reform as put forward to us today. Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just be very brief too. I'd just like to commend my colleagues and thank them for the effort that's gone into this. You know, we've debated this very, very robustly for, what is it now, a year or whatever the time frame is. We've gone into this in huge detail, and it's evidenced today by the fact that in 40 minutes of contributions around the table, no one's come up with anything new. We are totally over this. I mean, all over it. I mean, we're actually over it as well. We are really got this sorted. So I'd just like to say, well done, team.
Thanks, Councillor Blakey. I think that actually sums it up really well. In the call I was on yesterday, the Minister was being very bullish and really confident actually. By the end of the call, she was less so. And that was after a call with the Canterbury Mayoral Forum. I really hope that she and the government are definitely listening and listening hard on this particular topic. And I hope the choice does really remain for our community, as we expect it to be. And we will stand up strongly for our community. I want to make that point really clear. D2 is what we're resolving here as part of the resolutions, informs the government that the council will strongly and actively oppose government mandating the proposed entity-based model for water services delivery. Following this meeting today, I'll be putting that message really strongly to the government on your behalf, and it's a leisure that will come from all of us as councillors united that this model is not right for our community. With that, I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? I declare that carried unanimously. Well done, team. All right. This is the only piece of business we've discussed today, thankfully. So the only thing left is to declare our next meeting to be held on the 5th of October at Royal Canterbury High Court Civic Centre. So that's next Tuesday. So with that, I'll declare our meeting closed and thank everyone for their attendance.